Are you who you are because of the genes you were born with, or because of the world you grew up in? You know, it's one of the oldest, biggest questions in all of psychology, and for a long, long time, the answers seem to lean really heavily one way. But as we're about to see, a handful of just brilliant and sometimes pretty bizarre studies completely changed the game. Okay, let's dive right in. Just think about it for a second. Your personality, your intelligence, your fears, even your talents. Are they just written into your DNA, kind of like a blueprint handed down from your parents? Or are they sculpted over time by your childhood, your education, your friends, and every choice you've ever made? This, right here, is the heart of the whole nature versus nurture debate. So, here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this thing head on. We'll start with some powerful evidence for team nature, looking at these uncanny twin coincidences and what happens when you literally split a brain in two. Then we'll see how nurture fights back, exploring how experience can physically change our brains and how babies learn to see danger. And then finally, we'll bring it all together for the final verdict.
All right, first up, let's look at one of the most compelling arguments for the sheer power of our genes. It comes from the landmark Minnesota study of twins reared apart. And yeah, the title alone tells you this is going to be fascinating.
The logic here is it's brilliant. See, identical twins share 100% of their genes. So if you can find twins who were separated at birth and raised in totally different families, maybe in different towns with completely different experiences, well, any similarities they have as adults must be because of their shared genetics. It's pretty much the perfect natural experiment. Now, what's really wild is just how similar these separated twins were. This table shows the correlation, basically a measure of similarity. Now look at this. Look at traditionalism and social closeness. The numbers for twins raised apart are almost identical to the numbers for twins raised together. This suggests that the environment they grew up in had, well, a shockingly small effect on these core personality traits. It's kind of crazy.
And this quote from the researchers themselves just nails it. They found that for trait after trait, from things like religiosity all the way to job satisfaction, our genes play a huge, huge role. It really seemed like a massive victory for team nature.
But the evidence for a genetic blueprint doesn't stop there. Oh no. Other researchers decided to look directly at the hardware, our brains, to see just how pre-programmed we really are. So let's move on to the famous split brain studies and see how this all connects.
Okay, so your brain has two halves, a left and a right hemisphere, and they are in constant communication through this massive superhighway of nerves called the corpus callosum. But back in the 1960s, surgeons started severing this connection in patients with really extreme epilepsy. And this gave researchers a golden opportunity to ask, what happens when the two halves of the brain can't talk to each other anymore?
Well, they found out really fast that the left brain it's the academic, it's the talker, it handles all the heavy lifting for language, speech, writing, and logical calculations. It's the part of you that is literally reading these words right now and making sense of them.
The right brain, on the other hand, is the artist, the dreamer. It totally excels at nonverbal stuff, understanding spatial relationships, recognizing faces, appreciating art, and grasping abstract, symbolic ideas. It operates almost completely without words.
And here is where it gets absolutely wild. Researchers flashed the word heart across the center of a patient's vision. Now, the letters ART went to the language-focused left brain. So when they asked the patient, what did you see? They said, art. Makes sense. But HE went to the silent right brain. So when they asked the patient to point with their left hand, which is controlled by the right brain, to what they saw, they pointed to the word he. It's incredible. It's like two different minds with their own distinct pre-wired abilities living in one skull. Another powerful point for nature.
Okay, so far, the evidence for a genetic blueprint seems overwhelming, right? But is that the whole story? Not even close. Now we're going to pivot. Let's look at a groundbreaking study that shows the incredible power of the environment to physically sculpt our brains.
So these researchers at Berkeley set up two very different worlds for rats. Some of them were put in what they called an impoverished environment, a small cage all alone with nothing to do. The others? They got put in an enriched environment, which was basically Disneyland for rats. A huge cage, other rats to hang out with, and a rotating set of new toys to play with every single day. After just a few weeks, the results were, well, they were stunning and completely undeniable. The rats from the Disneyland cage had developed heavier,
thicker cerebral cortices. That's the part of the brain that does all the higher-order thinking. Their brain cells were literally larger, and they had way more neurochemical activity.
So, here's the crucial point. Experience isn't just something that happens to us. It actually gets inside us. It physically changes the very structure of our brains. This was a massive point for Team Nurture, proving that our environment plays an absolutely critical role in our development. So, we've got strong evidence for nature and strong evidence for nurture. How in the world do these two forces work together? Well, our final study, the famous visual cliff, gives us a beautiful little glimpse into this intricate dance. The setup was really simple but totally ingenious. Okay, picture a table with a solid piece of thick glass on top. On one side, there's a checkered pattern right under the glass, so it looks shallow. On the other side, that same pattern is way down on the floor, creating the illusion of a steep drop-off, a visual cliff. Then they place an infant who has just learned to crawl right in the middle.
Researchers had the baby's mothers call to them from across the deep side. And here's the key number. Out of 27 infants who actually crawled off that center board, 24 of them, 24, refused to cross over to the deep side.
The babies would crawl right up to the edge, they'd peer down, and then they'd back away. A lot of them even patted the glass. They could feel that it was solid, but the visual information, the perception of a dangerous drop, was so powerful that they still wouldn't cross. This suggests that depth perception is probably innate, that's nature. But the fear of falling, that's likely learned through experience, and that's nurture.
So what do we make of all this? We've seen really powerful evidence for our genetic blueprint and equally powerful evidence for our environmental sculptor. Let's try to bring it all together for the final verdict.
So, on one hand, nature gives us the blueprint. The twin studies show that our genes give us these strong predispositions, right? And the split brain studies show our brains come with specialized hardware already installed. But nurture is the sculptor. The rat study shows how our experiences physically shape that hardware, and the visual cliff suggests that our experiences teach us how to use our innate abilities out in the real world.
And this right here is the most important takeaway. The old debate was always framed as a battle, nature versus nurture. But what the science really shows us is that this is a false choice. The truth is way more interesting. It's a constant, dynamic interaction between our genes and our environment.
In fact, to make things even more complex, the researchers from that original twin study offered this mind-bending idea. Our genes don't just influence our traits, they actually influence the kinds of environments and experiences we seek out in the first place. So, an innately adventurous person might choose to go rock climbing, which then further shapes their brain and personality.
Which leaves us with one final, fascinating question to just ponder. If our genetic blueprint is pushing us toward the very chisel the sculptor is going to use, can we ever truly separate the two? Where does nature end and nurture begin? Well, that's a question that science is still working to answer.